Welcome to the People of Color Living with Diabetes Virtual Summit. I am so excited to be talking to you today. Welcome, welcome, welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to talk to you too.
Oh my goodness, you've got such a great story, as with all of our guests that I've had the pleasure of interviewing. But one thing that sticks out for you that you specialize in is diabetes, shame, and stigma. So I've already told the listeners a little bit about you and your bio, so they know you are the hangry woman. But I really want to get into diabetes, shame, and stigma pretty heavily because I think that in communities of color, particularly when we talk about Blacks and African Americans, and I shouldn't just say that, Hispanics, there are several communities of color that really have an issue with the stigma and the shame that's associated with having a diagnosis of diabetes. And so I do know you have type 2 diabetes. Tell us a little bit about your experience personally from the time you were diagnosed, even up to today, the things that you deal with shame and stigma of your diagnosis.
Yeah, so I was diagnosed when I was 26 years old, just 4 years ago in 2016. And for me, I think even my experience learning about diabetes really started with shame and stigma. It was the conversation with my doctor that was like, you could lose your liver, you're going to like lose your kidneys and have to go on dialysis, you may have amputations, you may lose your eyesight, like going through all of the complications of diabetes before even saying to me, this is something that you can live with, and if you manage it, it's going to be okay. And also just kind of having the negative conversation before the positive, and before like really highlighting like this is what a life with diabetes could be like. And so it started.
Wow, wait, I gotta stop you right there.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, because I know that there are other healthcare professionals that are watching. I know that there are other diabetes educators that are watching. And so what I need for you to do, just listening to what Mila said, is when we have patients and clients that come in and they're newly diagnosed, they're already scared enough. They're already confused enough. We don't need to use the scare tactics. We don't need to go down this negative worst case scenario. What we need to do is focus on the positive aspect of the condition first, and then talk about the complications. Is that what you're saying, Mila? Because that was just like a light bulb just went off in my head just now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm a pretty reasonable person, and I know maybe not all patients are, or not all patients may want to listen, or some may be okay with kind of like the fear tactic, and that's what like straightens them up and gets them to like adhere, I think is usually like the terminology. And for me, I would have been okay knowing what the complications were, but knowing that the first words out of my doctor's mouth was like, you have diabetes, you could lose blah, 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 blah. And so it to me was like, should I even try? Should I just give up now? Is there any point to me even trying to manage my blood sugar at this point? Because if you're telling me this right off the bat, it feels like this is where I am. Like there's no way I can do better. And so that always stuck with me for forever, like since my diagnosis, because I always felt like if I would have had a different conversation, or the conversation would have really stuck to like, you can live a healthy life with diabetes, and here's how we're going to take care of that, and here's why you have to take medications, here's why I want you to take insulin. I understand you don't want to take insulin, but here's why I'm telling you it would be great for you to do this now. And so like having the conversation in those terms instead of just all of the fear and like making me feel ashamed that I was sitting there in that place at that time, like facing these things potentially, was what made me feel like I just don't know what to do about it. I don't know what to do next. I don't know where to go. I'm scared of all of this, and am I even going to survive it? And that's such a sad thing to think when you're 26. You know, you think like, okay, you've ruined your entire life. Like, what do you do next? And so, you know, luckily for me, I am one of those people who's like very much a go-getter, and like I just wanted to know more. I was like, okay, well, if all of these things are about to happen to me, like what can I do, and who else is out there living with diabetes that I can talk to and get just resources and tips from. And when I was looking for resources, they were all pharmaceutical, or they came from organizations like the ADA, which are great resources.
Mhm.
But for me, I really wanted that lifestyle component. I wanted to see somebody who was like me with I was diagnosed at a 12% A1C, so super high. I wanted to see somebody like me who went from that point to getting their A1C down, feeling like they were living a life that they loved, being able to eat the foods that they really liked and manage that and manage their blood sugar, and just kind of overall living a good life with diabetes. And when I looked for that, it was really hard to find. I could only find just a few people who were talking about that. And it didn't occur to me until much later, like probably like a few months ago, that I couldn't find a lot of people because of the shame and stigma that comes with a diagnosis of type 2 diabetes. And I know all of us with diabetes face the stigma, because people always think, well, you got diabetes because you ate too much sugar, or you got diabetes because you're fat, or lose some weight, you won't ever have to take insulin again. And like all of those like really kind of bad ideas that are out there. So we all see that and we all face that. But I think specifically with type 2, because it's dubbed as a lifestyle disease, people think that
it's something that you're doing. It's you are not living a healthy lifestyle, and you've caused this to yourself.
Exactly.
Or caused this on yourself.
Yeah, you did this. Like, it's your fault that you have diabetes. It's your fault that you have high blood sugar. And like, if you have any complications or you die from diabetes, like that's your fault because you had diabetes and you caused it. And so we see so much of that stigma and that shame that people face, because when the finger is pointed at you and it's somebody saying, you did this to yourself, it's your fault. When your body just has insulin resistance, or for people with type 1 who like their pancreas just doesn't work, it doesn't make insulin, then you don't want to talk about it. You want to hide from it because you feel like, what's the point? Like, if nobody's going to understand where I'm coming from, or nobody's going to understand that I'm trying to do the best for my health, why should I even talk about it? And I think a lot of people with type 2 face that fear.
So you said that you reached out. There were like a handful of people, if that means, that were actually speaking out about type 2 diabetes and living and managing type 2 diabetes. So what was the reception when you reached out to those individuals?
They didn't want to talk to me. They were kind of like, I do this for myself. I write this because it was other bloggers who were writing about diabetes, and they were like, I just want a place where I can vent, and I don't want to talk to anybody else. I don't want to make this a public thing. I don't want other people to know about it. And so for me, I was like, but I want to know, like, I want somebody to show me, what they're doing. And I would love to just like have that peer support and have somebody who I know knows what they're doing kind of talk to me about how they're going through the motions and the roller coaster of diabetes. And when people said, I don't want to talk to you, I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm going to start my own thing, and it's mostly just going to be for me and a place to put my recipes and vent about diabetes too. But if anybody else finds it and somebody else sees it, then maybe it's a place for them where they can shoot me a message and say, hey, I saw that you wrote about this thing. I am really excited to see somebody saying that, because that's how I felt. And I didn't know that I felt that way, or I did know I felt that way. And I'm so glad that I'm not alone and it's not just me. And so that's what I was really looking for the whole time, is just people to commiserate with. Like, I wanted to know that I wasn't the only one going through the roller coaster of lows and not being able to figure out what to do to get my blood sugar back up, or gaining weight, taking insulin, like being told lose weight by my doctor, but then taking insulin and gaining weight. And like, what do I do in the meantime? And so it was for me like a place where I was like, okay, maybe there are other people who are going through all the same stuff, and I'm not just by myself in this. And that was really hard to find in the beginning. And now I think there are way more people with type 2 talking about it. And that's really exciting, because it means that shame is like slowly going away, and people can kind of see that diabetes is not their fault. Like, no matter what kind of diabetes you have, it's not your fault. and making sure people know that you can live that happy, healthy life with diabetes, and there are other people out there with you and just like you. It makes it a lot easier, I think, for people to come to terms with.
That's it's unfortunate that you reached out and these individuals really weren't receptive to kind of bringing you under their protection or under their wing and talking to you about it. And I think I've heard this time and time again with a lot of the speakers. It's like, I started doing this because nobody, there was nothing for me. There were no resources that were there for me. So would you say that that's how you found your voice, that that's where your motivation came from to create the blog and do the recipes and everything else, all the talking, you go all over the country talking about this. Is that how you found your voice? And what kind of advice can you give to other people in finding their voice? Because it has to be terrifying, right? To get up in front of large crowds and to talk about something that's so personal to you.
Yeah, it really scares me every time because the reception to it isn't always positive. Like, I do get some of those comments where people are like, if you would just lose some weight, you wouldn't have type 2 diabetes.
Really?
Like, obviously you don't do what you say you're doing because you look the way you do. Like, I get comments like that all the time, and I'm like, wow, like, it's crazy that people can kind of like share that blame and like just stigmatize people in that way. But for me, the thought that always runs through my head is like, if one person who felt the way that I did when I was diagnosed can find me and see that I am open about my diabetes diagnosis, I don't hide anything about it. I don't, like, if somebody asks me, what's your A1C right now? I'm hesitant, but I'll tell them, like, I'll be honest and I'll tell them why I feel like it's that way. I will tell them what I did if my A1C has been ranging in a good place. And I think that for me, it was all about being authentic with people and not just sharing like the happy, great moments with diabetes, but also sharing those moments that are really hard to work through and how hard it is to get there, but then what happens when you come out on the other side of it. And I think that it was really important for me to make sure that people knew that, like, it's not all just like you can live this happy, healthy, joyful life with diabetes, but it's also really difficult to do that. And you have to put in a lot of work, a lot of mental energy, a lot of time. But once you do it and once you get there, the outcome is so much greater. And you get that like happy dance in the doctor's office when they're like, your A1C is under 7, or when your labs are all normal and everything looks good. And so to me, it was really important that people just saw kind of an authentic voice, and that I was able to just say, like, this is my life with diabetes. It might be the same as yours. It might be different than yours, but either way, this is my life living with it. And if you ever want to talk about it, there's someone here who's willing to do that and willing to be there for you and chat with you about it.
Wow. Hashtag my everyday life. I love that you're so authentic and also transparent, because again, that's something that you were looking for when you were diagnosed, but yet you couldn't find. Do you think that it helps being a woman of color? And how is that reception when you're speaking to people that are younger, that are Black or brown? What is that reception from those individuals?
I think that the comment that I get most is that they're so glad to see me, because I think that we notice, especially in the diabetes community, that it's not representative of everyone. Like, you see certain body types or certain races or certain genders more often than others in advertising, in like organizational information that like goes out on websites or on social media. Yeah. And so there have been so many people who have said, like, I'm so glad to see you on that stage, or see you in that news article, or see your blog, being advertised somewhere, because I think people don't feel like they're represented the way that they should be. And I find that to be so true. Like, when I am invited to speak somewhere, or I'm invited to be a part of like some kind of campaign, I'm always the first person to ask. It's like the joke, like, who's all gonna be there? Because like, I want to know, like, who else? Like, are you inviting other people of color? Are you inviting other women?
Or am I the token, right?
Yeah, am I in person? And like, am I going to be the only one that shows up and like, that's the face that everyone's going to see? Because that's not okay. Like, there needs to be more voices, because I am not the voice for all Black people with diabetes. Like, all of our experiences are so different. And so for me, it's like, I'm always happy to be invited and always happy to be in those places, but I also try my best to bring other people with me and to kind of like keep stock of like, who else is a good voice in this. And so if like somebody asks me like, I want you to write an article about what it's like to live with wearing a CGM with type 2 diabetes, I'm like, okay, I love that, but I think that this person would actually be a better voice for that because of this and this. And like, I try not to take every opportunity for myself, but to give it to people who I know have better voices. And so for me, like, I think the representation is so important. And that's why this conference, I think, is so important, because it really showcases that we have a diversity of voices, diversity of thought. We're all living lives with diabetes, but we're all living them in different ways. And it's so important to see that there isn't this like one collective experience, but there's so many of us.
Oh, I love that. I love that. So let's keep talking about diversity, because you specifically wanted to talk about the lack of diversity when it comes to including more people of color in marketing and advertisement and brand. And so how do you think, and I know there's brands, I know there's organizations watching, we have our sponsors as well. What can we say to those organizations and those individuals on how to be more inclusive to people of color when it comes to promoting their products or selling their services and what forth?
Yeah, I think that the biggest thing to me is inviting us to the table is incredible. It's nice, it is helpful, it gets that diversity in the room. But I think something else that's really important is that whenever we include people of color in those like advertising campaigns or on social media or in newsletters or blogs or whatever, and we have people who are willing to share their stories, I think often in the diabetes community, we think we're all in this together. All people with diabetes matter. We are all, doing this collective thing to make sure that people have an awareness about diabetes. But I think that people of color are often forgotten, and it's in our picture showing up in a place is not the norm. And so when we do show up and we are being seen and we are being visible, I think it's really important for those brands to remember that they also have to protect our voices. So it's not just enough to invite us to the table and show us off to their audience and kind of check the diversity box. But I think it's important to remember that when you put a Black face up on advertising, the response isn't always going to be the same, and it's not always going to be nice. And you have to be there and be willing to stand up for that person that you asked to share their story and to put up on whatever billboard or pedestal to share. Because I know, like in my case, and I've been so lucky that for example, I wrote an article about the health disparities in people of color with diabetes a few weeks ago, and an organization shared it, and the comments were all terrible. And it's, in the midst of this backdrop of George Floyd and of just like all of us examining racism. And the article was basically saying, you have to look at the health disparities that come with people of color versus whites, because it is different. Like the treatment is different. Sometimes the way that people perceive the information is different. Yeah, and it cited.
I read the article. I thought it was a wonderfully written article. I'm beyond shocked that you would have gotten any kind of ugly responses. But since you did mention it, inquiring minds want to know what kind of responses did you get? Like, give us a couple of examples of some of the things that people.
Yeah. It was pretty awful. Like, some people were outright denying that these things didn't exist when the article like cited some pretty big research that kind of shows that it does exist and that these health disparities are major in these different populations. Some people were like, stop pitting people with diabetes against each other. It's not black versus white. It, like, you can't say that people are treated worse in doctors' offices. It's just not true. Somebody said that they were a nurse and that because they've never seen that treatment themselves, or they've never treated anyone that way, that it doesn't exist. It was really denying the experiences of people of color over and over and over in that comment section. And the one thing that I was so appreciative of that brand for, well, actually two things. One was actually sharing the story, because they could have avoided it, never shared it, and never said anything. But the other thing that I appreciated was that they actually went back in the comments, and to every single person who denied the experience of people of color, they said, absolutely not. Here's some research that backs this up. Or in the article, Mila cited this. Maybe you should read this paper, and this will tell you a little bit more about why the context of this article exists. And so for me, that's the kind of thing that I mean. You know, they shared the article, I think, in part because it was a diverse voice talking about these different health disparities that people don't often pay attention to. But then at the same time, they were like, we're going to take our time and our energy and our people, and we're going to say something to the people who are denying that this happens and who are making comments that are kind of racist in our comments.
Well, no kind of to it. Let's put it there.
That we're racist, yeah.
Right, for sure, definitely racist. I want to say, first of all, that was a beautiful example and follow up to the statement that you made, because I think it's important that people that are not if you don't identify with being a person of color, I think it's important that as an ally, as a brand, as an organization, or whoever, that you realize that there is a responsibility that comes with checking that diversity box. And your example just highlighted that tremendously. It's not enough just to have us there because, well, you know, you gotta have a Hispanic, you know, you gotta have somebody that's black, you know, you gotta have somebody that's Asian. But when people come and attack us, we need you to be able to have things in place where you're going to protect us and protect the message that we're bringing. I think, one, it's very unfortunate that even to this day in 2020, people's experiences are just completely invalidated and disregarded, okay? Secondly, I think also people don't use the same lens to look at situations. And so if you've never been a black woman, 30 years old or 38 years old, you know, living with diabetes in America, then you can't tell me what my experiences mean to me. And so it's unfortunate that that occurred, but I think that the way that that organization, that brand that you're talking about, handled that was perfect. I also think that it's a matter of basic human decency. You know, I would think that if someone white wrote in a story about or a piece about how they were treated with healthcare system, nobody would second guess it, right? Nobody would say, oh, that didn't happen, or that couldn't have happened, it must have been you. But it seems to happen time and time again when someone of color talks about their mistreatment and their experiences. And we've got to do something about that. I mean, I think what the brand did is a great first start. But I think all of the brands have to do this.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you shared that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that we're kind of in this place where brands that don't already do this, like, just don't know where to start. And so, like, they want to do something and they want to be inclusive and they want to make sure that people get to share their voices, but they don't know, or they might not have a diverse enough staff that can tell them, like, oh, maybe you should, have somebody watching out on the comments when you post this person's story because it might get crazy. Or you might have a situation that you may not anticipate just because you don't have, like, diversity in the people who are sitting at the table. And so I think it's really important for brands to recognize that you kind of have to think outside of yourself, and you have to remember that, like, the reception that people are going to get when they look one way is totally different than what they're going to get if you look the other way. And it's really important to recognize that, like, you should protect everybody who you decide to put up there. You should stand behind anybody who wants to tell their story. But I think you have to be very careful and very mindful that a person of color's experience doesn't always get taken at face value, and people might argue over it. And you have to be there to protect them, to not shield them from that, but to say, like, hey, I'm with you, and I'm ready to help you. Absolutely. And that's something else that I really loved from the publication who I wrote the article for. Their editor emailed me and said, like, the moment that they saw those comments, because I shared it on my own Facebook and I'm friends with them, and then the minute they saw it, they emailed me and they were like, hey, we're with you. Like, we are going to stick up, back you up 100%. We loved your article. We wouldn't have published it if we didn't love it. We loved the idea of what you wrote about. Like, we are here and we are going to fight for you. And that was I was so appreciative of that, because not every brand will do that and not every publication will do that. But it was nice to know that, like, I have a rapport with these people that I work with, and I've mentioned these things to them as parts of my concern, and they took them seriously. And I think too, if you're a blogger or an influencer, or you want to share your story, it's okay to bring up those concerns to the people that you work with. Like, it's okay to ask them, who else are you working with? It's okay to suggest other people. It's okay to say, I want to share my story, but I'm hesitant because of what I've seen here, here, and here. It's okay to say, I am concerned outright. I want to know why you're asking me to share my story at this point. Like, it's okay to press and ask those questions, because at the end of the day, like, it's your face and your voice that's going up there, and you want to make sure that you're protected too, and that those brands are going to stick up for you, or you're going to have somebody on your side if things do go wrong.
Absolutely. And I think also when we're talking about the brands, and I know we're speaking from the perspective of maybe a freelancer or a blogger, an author or something like that, but just thinking about it, because I always try to look at everything from the patient perspective, right? If I am noticing how a brand or a website or a pharmaceutical company is going to bat for you, then that is going to make me more interested in purchasing their medication or their technology, their supplies, etc. And so I think it goes twofold, right? Like, you have to go to bat not only for the people that you're sponsoring, you've also got to go to bat for your patients and your clients as well. And I'll also say this, as you were talking, you were saying that you think that a lot of organizations realize they kind of missed the mark on diversity and they really don't know where to start. The only time I think, and this is me talking, I haven't quoted anybody, that an organization can be unsure where to start is if you don't have people in place there anyway. Because if you have someone that looks like me and you, or from another community of color, there's no way that that individual is not sitting there at the table saying, you know what, we need to bring on Mila Clark. We need to bring Quisha in. We need to bring somebody of color in so that we can attract more people that identify with them and identify with their experiences. And so for me, it all starts with leadership. It starts at the top. And once they put the right people in place, I think it's a trickle-down effect. You'll be able to see a lot better results when it comes to diversity and inclusion.
Absolutely. And I think to just like piggyback on what you said, it's really important, I think, for leadership in companies to be conscious that they're asking people for their opinions. Because if you are the only person of color sitting in a room, you are sometimes not at all comfortable saying, like, I hear where you're coming from, guys, but you're ignoring an entire community, or you're ignoring an entire group of people. And so I think it's really important to set the foundation and set the tone that, like, it's welcome for you to insert your perspective and to share what you're thinking, so that you don't feel like you're maybe the only person there and you can't say something because you, one, don't want to speak for everybody, but two, you are unsure of like how it will be taken if you are that only person there.
Great point, great point. Well, I wanted to ask you one last question before we end our conversation today. It's something that I've seen on your blog, or I think it might have been an article that you wrote some time ago, but you talked about how being diagnosed with type 2 diabetes actually put you in a better place, like mentally, physically, emotionally now than you were before you were diagnosed. And I know I've had patients, a couple in my years providing diabetes education, that have said diabetes saved my life. And when I read your article, I kind of came away with the same thing. Like, you're kind of saying that too. And I want you to tell the viewers, because they may not understand what that means. Like, really, diabetes saved your life is better off now. Explain what you mean by what you wrote, so maybe it can help someone else.
I tell people that and they think I'm crazy. They're like, "Are you insane? Are you sure?" Because it's hard work. Like diabetes is hard work, but I don't think that I would pay this much attention to my health if I didn't have diabetes. I probably would write things off or think like, oh, being tired is normal, it's fine, or thinking like the littlest things are normal when they snowball into bigger health issues. And I think now that I'm conscious of my health and I have to check my blood sugar a few dozen times every day, and I have to take insulin and I have to check my blood pressure every week, like I do all of these things that I don't think that I would have done necessarily at my age if I didn't have diabetes, or if I hadn't known that I had diabetes. And I think that in the long run is making me healthier. I feel like diabetes is on my mind all the time, which can be overwhelming, but it's also great because I double check myself. Like I double check, like, am I snacking too much, or my blood sugar has been running high for a little while. Like maybe I'm a little stressed out, or maybe like my eating habits haven't been that great, or, oh no, actually like I haven't exercised all week. That's probably why. So I am having these like constant check-ins with myself. And I feel like because I'm doing that and because I'm logging my food and logging my emotions and checking in on my blood sugars and all of my, like knowing my numbers, I feel like I have such a better grasp on my health than I ever would have had not having diabetes. And so I feel super serious about it when I say like it really saved my life, because although I'm living with a chronic condition that can have really terrible complications if it's not taken care of, I feel like I know that in the back of my head, and I am also like so excited to take care of my health, because I'm like, that just means I get to live a little bit longer and I get to live longer without complications, and it that makes me, I think, happy in a sense. And so when I think about that, and I think about saying like, oh yeah, I think that having diabetes really saved my life, it's, I think, because I get more of those check-ins and I'm so much more conscious of my health now than I ever had been before.
Wow, that was a great response. You are just a wealth of information. I love your bubbly personality. And I love how you just kind of taken lemons and made lemonade. And thank you so much for being a voice for the people, for the younger generation, and for letting them know that they can have diabetes and they can still live and they can have a good quality of life. Tell our viewers where they can find you.
My website is hangrywoman.com, and I am the Hangry Woman all over social media. So all everywhere. If you look up, you'll find me.
I love it. I get hangry about one today. I love it. Well, it's been so good talking to you. Thank you again for being a special guest on our first annual People of Color Living with Diabetes Virtual Summit. I look forward to finding some time to talk to you again very soon.
Yeah, me too. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Talk soon. Bye-bye. Thank you.